Today is Jim Coan. Jim started his surveying career in 1968, and he's worked in Maryland, Virginia, Alberta, Canada, Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. Jim is a professional land surveyor in Washington and Oregon, and is also a CFED surveyor. Jim has taught at Renton Technical College, Seattle University, and several state and national conferences. And Jim has also published over 30 articles on surveying, as well as a book on math for surveyors. Jim is the past president of Land Surveyors Association of Washington and is the current director for Washington to the National Society of Professional Surveyors. So Jim, we thank you for being on here tonight, and hopefully everybody will gain a whole lot of knowledge and moving forward. We appreciate it.
Well, this is truly an honor. Thanks for having me, Trent. I always I look forward to helping out my fellow surveyors whenever I can. And what we're going to talk about tonight is the grant boundary adjustments. And this is it's a fairly simple way of doing business after you get to know it. But I guess we could say that about most things. But it is a very valuable tool I found in the public land survey system, as well as I've used it in subdivisions and other things. So you East Coast surveyors that are not part of the public land survey system, this is still a valuable tool for you all. So let's just jump in and see what we're talking about here. First of all, you can find the section for grant boundary adjustments in Chapter 7 on page 167, section 7-54 of the Manual Survey Instructions 2009. Now, what the grant boundary is used for, it's a method is used to set lost corners on most of the non-rectangular entities in the public land survey system. It involves a comparison of distances and directions with record and measured coordinates to establish a ratio of adjustments and a rotation, as we'll see. So what we want to do with grant boundaries, we're going to adjust what the record has told us that we found from historical documents to what we found in the field, and we're going to try to get the two of them to come together. And so it's a very important thing to do. Now, I want you to keep in mind that we can use this for other places other than the public land survey system. But for right now, we're going to talk about that. And then as we go along, we'll come up with some examples on how we can do it in other positions as well. And one of the things that, Trent, one of the things I always like is if anybody has a question, I assume they'll contact you, but just interrupt me and ask the question right now, because it's been my experience that if one person has a question, 3 or 4 more people might have the same question. You're just too shy to ask. So
yeah,
don't feel bad about interrupting me.
Yeah, everybody's got the access to unmute themselves and ask a question at any time. So we're good.
Good.
Yep.
So once we get this ratio that I was just talking about, then we can have a rotation is established between 2 surveys for the bearings. Now, I have pictures of this, so we'll take a look at pictures here in a minute, but I just want to get the basic concept out. The purpose is to preserve the angular relationship at the lost corners and adjust the distances the same ratio throughout the corners. So what we're doing here is we're going to adjust the distances, but the angular relationship between lines, we want to keep that the same all the way around. We don't want to adjust that angular relationship also. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Let's take a look at this picture. What we have here is we have this red line. Take a look at this red lines that I have here. Can you all see my mouse moving around?
Yes, sir. Yep.
All right, good. So what we have along these red lines is record information. We got this from some historical document or field notes or however we came by it, we have it. I want you to notice on between line A and B here, we have north 26 degrees, 15 minutes west, 49.56 chains. That's what they were doing when they surveyed this, whenever they did it. We'll say 1905, whenever it was. And if you take a look at the bearings along the record information here, the bearings were to the nearest minute. And actually, if you take a look at it, the argument can be made they're to the nearest 5 minutes because they're all multiples of 5 along here. And we have the chains that they measured. Now, down here, I converted chains to feet. And that's what we have here. And the reason I did that is because I want us to work in feet, because that's what we're working in now. But keep in mind that this 49.56 chains will calculate to 3,270.96 feet, but this is a false precision. The survey was not to the nearest hundredth of a foot. It was to the nearest link, and that's 0.6 of a foot. So keep that in mind as we go along, okay? Now take a look at what we did here. We came up from point A, what the original surveyor did, to point B, to C, to D, to E, and to F, and they put in monuments here. In the historical record, it tells you that there's some kind of monument out there. So what we can do is we went out in the field and we found this monument down here where it says A. And right over here, there's a picture of that monument. And we verified that in the historical records. Yep, that's Monument A right there. We found it. We have that. And then I calculated coordinates for search radiuses for B, C, D, E, and F. Sent the crew out there and said, find the monuments. So they went up to B and they did a search radius and they couldn't find anything. Same thing with C. They couldn't find anything. Same thing with D, E. And when they started searching for F, lo and behold, they found the monument. And here's a picture of the monument over here. But it wasn't in the calculated position where the record said the monument should be. It was just about 50 feet away from it. But if you take a look at what they were doing here and the equipment they were using and stuff, it wouldn't be that uncommon to be 50 feet away over this distance. So we find this monument and we locate it. So now we have coordinates on everything that we started out. Now these coordinates, you can just, make up your own coordinate system because it's just for what we're trying to do. So we have coordinates for all these along here, and then we have the coordinate for G, and it's all on the same coordinate base, okay? So just for argument's sake, I'll say that I started at point A, and I said, I'm going to call that north 10,000, east 10,000. And then I calculated everything with relationship to that, okay? So we find we have this information here. Now, what we were talking about before in the first 2 slides, what we're going to do is we're going to take the coordinate we found in F, and we're going to inverse back to A. When we inverse between A and F, that gives us a bearing and a distance between F and A. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to inverse between G and A. Now, don't forget that G and F are the same point, but in different positions, because F is the record where the record says it was, and G is where we actually found it. Don't forget that. So we inverse between these two and between these two, and we have a bearing and a distance between A and F. We have a bearing and a distance between A and G. And now you'll notice how I'm calling this out. I have north 85, 36, 45 west, 274.23 change, which is 14,746.13 feet, false precision, okay? And that is the record information. That's what the record information told me. Now, between where we found the monument and A, we have north 87, 10, 24, 14,705.44 feet, and that's measure. That's what we found in the field. That's what we found, and we calculated it, and I call it measure because we measured between them, okay? That's what we have. Now, you'll notice that the bearing from A to F is north 85 degrees, but the bearing from A to G, where the monument really is 87 degrees and change. So we would have to rotate from point A. We're going to hold A as a hinge point, and we're going to rotate everything from the bearing of 85 degrees and change to 87 degrees and change. Okay, we're going to take the whole thing, but we're going to keep the angular proportions. We don't want to change the angular relationship from line to line. Got that? And then we're going to take the distances between the record and the measure, and we're going to come up with a ratio, and we're going to apply that ratio to each one of the distances along here. And that's all there is to it. Okay, let's go on. Now, the steps for this method are as follows. Number one, reduce the record bearing and distances to the total difference in latitudes and departures. And those of you who don't know the old language, latitudes and departures, nothing more than difference in north and difference in east. Latitudes are difference in north, departures are difference in east. And then we're going to inverse to determine the direction and length between the two identified points. And that's what we did to the record information. If you remember, we calculated, we found the difference in north and the difference in east between A and F, and we inversed between them, and we found a direction and a distance. That's what it said to do there, right there. The next thing, determine the actual bearing and distance between the same identified points, but the found points. And so that's what we did between A and G. We have coordinates on both of them. We inverse between them, and now we have a bearing and distance between A and G. How are we doing so far? Am I going too fast, or is everybody with me? Okay, this young man down here at the bottom, young surveyor, but he looks like he knows what he's talking about, so that's good.
Liam is super smart. Liam loves being on these meetings, so
that's great.
If you can keep up with Liam, we're good.
So the difference between the bearings in step 1 and 2 for the above will determine the amount and direction of rotation and of each intermediate course. The ratio of the lengths computed in step 1 and 2 above will apply to the record lengths of the intermediate course. Apply to the record lengths, because the record lengths, we're going to use that and we're going to adjust those. Now, here's the part that every surveyor has ever told me that has been my mentors in any situation. Before you put anything in the ground, look, see if you can find something that's already there. Just don't assume it's not there, but look around. There's a good chance you'll find something, and I'll be talking more about this here in a bit. Okay, now, as you can see, it's nothing more than a rotation and scale problem. Now, those of you who use Civil 3D, this is a piece of cake. There's just nothing to it. Just grab what you want, rotate it, scale it, boom, you're done. And I use a different software, but it's every bit as easy.
Yeah, somebody made that comment on social media yesterday. Just use the align command in Carlson and you're done.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have our point that we found, point A. We went up to point B, couldn't find anything. Record information to point C, couldn't find anything. Record information to D, record information to E, and record information to F. And I told my survey crew when I sent them out there, I asked the party chief to have a search radius of at least 50 feet, okay, to try to find original stuff. And they didn't find anything there until they came over here and they found point G. So now, if I take north 87 degrees, 10 minutes, 24 seconds west, and I subtract from that north 85, 36, 45 west, I will have a difference of 133.39 unless I made a blunder, and I'm not above that. So you might want to check my arithmetic. Now notice that what I'm doing in this situation, I want that record line right here to end up right over top of the measured line down here. So I want to rotate all of this information counterclockwise. You see how that works? Just moving it counterclockwise. And that's what we want to do. So we know that we have to move it by this much. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply this rotation angle to each one of these bearings. Okay? And that's going to keep the angular relationship of the lines. Any questions on that? Okay. Now, what we also did is we took the measured distance right here and we divided into the measured distance, we divided the record distance. You always want to divide the record into the measure. And that will give you a ratio. And we're going to apply this ratio to each one of the measurements that we have here. Okay, how are we doing? I'm going pretty fast on this stuff, but okay, young man down here. What is your, Kat, what is your, is that your son?
Yes, he's 11. He's in 5th grade.
Oh. What's your name? I'm sorry, son.
Liam.
William?
Liam.
Yep.
Liam. Okay.
Yep.
You like surveying, do you?
I like math.
He loves math.
Okay. Here's I'm off on a tangent here, Chen. I'm sorry. Kat, get my email from Trent. Send me your email. I want to send him my book on surveying math.
Will do.
All right, good. Sorry about that. So anyhow, that's what we're going to do. We have record information, we have measured information, we have our rotation angle counterclockwise, and we have our ratio. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply all this. Now note, when calculating the rotation angle, make sure the direction you are rotating, counterclockwise or clockwise or counterclockwise. Make sure of that. I can't tell you how many times I've given this to students and they've done everything correctly except they rotated in the wrong direction. Okay, so make sure. And I even had one young man come up and say, what do you mean by counterclockwise and clockwise? I said, you need to get away from a digital watch. So, anyhow, also I have a note down here, when calculating the scale factor, always, do you see how I have always underlined there? Divide the record distance into the measured distance. So let's take a look at what we have here. We take the record bearing, north 2615 west. We have the record distance. Now we're going to apply that, let me see here, see if I can go back up here. 133.39 counterclockwise to northwest. So because we're in the northwest quadrant, we're going to take that rotation angle, that 1 degree and change, and we're going to add it to that northwest bearing to get the new northwest bearing. Because in the northwest quadrant, you start at north and you turn towards the west, and we're going further to the west because we're going counterclockwise. Does that make sense to you all? And so then we come up with our measured bearing. Notice now it's to the nearest second. Okay, we could have a big discussion about, random errors and, how good the measurements were and stuff like that, but that's for a different talk. Then I took the distance, 3,270.96, and I applied that scale factor, that 0.99, whatever it was. I multiplied it by the record information, and I got the measured information. This is the ratio that we're talking about. Now, one thing I want to really nail this down is that you'll notice that right here between where the record said this point was and to where we found the point, the record was farther away than where the measured was. So each one of these distances are going to be shorter than the record distances, because what we found in the field was shorter than what we calculated with the record. Does that make sense to y'all? It's just a common sense thing if you stop and think about it. So then we came up and we had another northwest bearing. So we added the rotation angle and we got the new measured. We added the ratio, multiplied the ratio, and we got the new measured distance. We did this again. We had a third northwest bearing. So we added the counterclockwise rotation, and we calculated the measured distance from the record distance, and we're in the third leg. But take a look down here at the southwest, okay? Now in the southwest quadrant, keep in mind that we start measuring the bearing from the south towards the west, and we're applying a counterclockwise rotation. So now we're going to have to subtract that rotation angle from the record southwest bearing to get the measured southwest bearing, the corrected one, the adjusted one. Be very careful about knowing what quadrant you're in, because sometimes you have to add, sometimes you have to subtract. And I've even known surveyors that don't trust themselves doing this, so they turn everything into azimuth. So they just have to do one thing one time, and that's fine, however you want to do it, just as long as you do it, okay? And then we have our common sense checks, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So we had another southwest here, 4730. We had to subtract the rotation angle to get where we needed the measure, or the stuff we're going to look at again. We take the record distance, multiply it by that scale factor, and we have the distance. So now what we have is we have a set of, I'm calling them measured bearings and measured distances because it's not part of the record. Now we can take this information that we've just calculated, and we can calculate coordinates for each one of those points, and we can go back out in the field and we can look for the monuments again. And if we can't find the monuments after a diligent look, notice I'm saying we're looking for the monuments again, and if we can't find them, then we'll set another monument. If we truly believe they're lost, okay, then we set it. But remember, setting a new monument is your last choice. You want to try to find the original. You want to do everything you can before you set another monument. Okay, Steve, would you agree with me on that? Anyhow,
I do agree with you.
Oh, good, good. So now we have all this. We calculate new sets of coordinates. We send the crew out in the field, and lo and behold, they either find the monuments or they put a new monument in, okay? And what we have done is we have adjusted. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty simple thing to do. All we're doing is we're using the record information, we're using what we found in the field, and we're adjusting the record information to what we found in the field. Now, take a look at this measured stuff that I've calculated here. We're to the nearest second over here, and over here we're to the 100th of a foot. Let's back up a couple slides to here, and the original information was to the nearest 5 minutes and to the nearest link. So it's not a bit of a stretch to say, yeah, this could be 50 feet out. It could easily be 50 feet out. But think about what they were using. If this surveyor was using a Burke's Improved Solar Compass, that was state-of-the-art stuff at the time. And now we're using the stuff we use. It's just unbelievable how good we are now, or how good our equipment is. And so we find that this is your common sense check. You know, does this look really just too weird to do, or is this look right? Now, counterclockwise, and all of these bearings are counterclockwise from these bearings. Common sense check, okay? The distances should be smaller. Here are the distances converted to feet. Here are the distances we calculated. They're shorter. So that's another common sense check. And that's what I call them. Now, what we've been talking about here is basically in the public land survey system. But I have a story to tell you before we get going on this thing. I was working on a job a few years back where we had to calculate a right-of-way, a power line right-of-way through a subdivision. It was this was a corridor 9 miles long, and we were going through this subdivision, and I was the head of the field crews. I was calculating the record information in the subdivision, and the boundaries and the lots and all that kind of stuff, and the roads and what the plat called out where the monuments were, all these kinds of things. And then I told my party chief, I said, I want you to go out there. I want you to locate the control monuments along the center line. Oops, excuse me. Sorry about that. I'm going to turn this off
Now
in case that happens again.
Mute your phones.
Anyhow, it's I'm sorry, I lost train of thought. So I told the party chief to go out and locate the control monuments, and then I saw a big difference between my record stuff and what he located in the field. So I used this system, this grant boundary, to keep that subdivision the way it was as far as the angular relationship of the lots, and I rotated it and I scaled it using a grant boundary adjustment. And then I told the party chief to go out there and see if he could find any of the property corners. And he started finding all kinds of them. I mean, this thing really works. You know, this just isn't some theoretical thing. It really works. So I really like it. It's an easy system to do. It's a very important system to have, and it's a great tool to have in your calculation toolbox. So Trent, I'm just going to open it up to any questions or anything anybody wants to bring into it now.
Yeah, I'd like to make good, Jim.
Yes.
Many times these meets and bounds surveys within the public land survey system, particularly the HESs and sometimes the mineral surveys, they kind of carried over some of their activities of not running completely around the meets and bounds survey. They would like run down an easy road or down a creek or something. They would then set their corners out off one line. So if they made a mistake going down that line and then they never closed on the outside, you've got that mistake to deal with, which can also increase all your search areas. We ran across up in Idaho. There was a period of time that I was the supervisory surveyor of several technicians out in the field on the forests. So they'd be doing the work and I'd go out in the field and check with them. Well, one guy called me from Salmon one time, said that he thought he had a 100-foot bust in his traverse. I says, well, why do you think you got a bust in your traverse? And he says, well, look, it's a 100-foot bust. He says, I've even cut it in half and I've still got that bust. So it says, well, send me a copy of the plat and let's look at it. And it was an obvious one. It had 5 corners on an HES, 2 on the far end crossing the creek and the road, 2 on the other end crossing the creek and the road, a straight line on one side, and then 1 angle point on the opposite. And I told him, I said, well, you better search from your found corners on one end to your found corners on the other, and then come back both directions. And they found that on one of the lines in there where the guy was going down the road, apparently he made a 100-foot bust, and he was using a 100-foot tape right down in the bottom. And so I gave him 2 different searches, but his next problem was it was a boulder in place with an X on it, with 2 XBO boulders for references for bearing rocks, all covered with moss.
Yeah.
Then I introduced him to a wire brush. We found it. We isolated which side of it that it was on. You could have done a grant boundary on that, but you would have really had a poor solution for the corner in between. And the grant best when you have a survey that is reasonably well done to begin with too.
Oh yeah. That's the best of all worlds. But
now there's one other thing I've noted. Go back to your diagram, your initial diagram. Okay, this I've always found important. When you're going from A through to F, and then you inverse also from A to G, your found point, you want to set up your bearings and distance adjustments in the same direction that the surveyor went in his original notes.
Yeah, I should have said
inverse
that.
from A to G, and then start inversing from F back to A and do all your adjustments, because that will mess it up. So you need to go the same direction as the surveyor went when you're resolving it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Those of you
There's some misclosure in that original survey.
Yeah. Those of you who don't know Steve Parrish, are you still running the CFED program, Steve?
Yes, and we're struggling in how to readjust it and bring it up to speed with the platform it's on. And I've got a big panel meeting coming up this Wednesday to discuss it further. We need some renovations for sure, particularly with Flash going away this month. And so much of everything we've had on this program that started 14 years ago is based on Flash, and we're having a real struggle, but it's and that's a long story, but I'm hoping still to be able to keep it around.
Like I said before, if I can help you, don't hesitate to call me.
You bet. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. So anybody else have any questions or comments or?
So there's one in the chat, and I'll get to Sean's in a second, but Robert had sent me an email. It says, what is the difference between a grant boundary and a broken boundary? And when should one be used as opposed to the other?
It's the big difference is the name. Okay. This, as you can see, my drawing here, it's a broken boundary. It's just, unless you, what I think of a broken boundary is just an odd shaped boundary. It's not part of the PLSS, nice square and all that kind of stuff. But this could be called a broken boundary. And a grant boundary, they call it a grant boundary because the lands that were surveyed usually prior to the PLSS coming up to them, and the PLSS came in and closed on these boundaries, and they were grants from someplace. Does that make sense to you?
It does to me. I think, Robert, you're on, and I think I saw Robert jump on. Did that help you out, Robert? Let's see. Yeah, he's still on.
Jim,
Yes.
you might want to address a little bit the significant difference between the compass rule and this broken or grant boundary.
Oh, yeah, yeah. A compass rule adjust. Not only does it adjust the distances, but it also adjusts the angles. And what will happen there is a compass rule adjust was a great tool for many, many years, but it treats the bearings and the distances as the same, not one better than the other, but the same. And when you do a compass rule adjust, you're adjusting not only the distances, but also the angles. So you're going to change the geometry of the figure. And that's what we're trying not to do with the grant boundary. We want to keep that same geometry. We just want to put it so it'll meet the field conditions. And there's a transit rule also, and it does basically the same thing, but you use different stuff. Now, I understand the Crandall rule will also honor the angular integrity, but you know, I've never done a Crandall rule adjustment, so I can't really speak to them.
Got it.
Hey, James, this is Mike with Caltrans. I just wanted to thank you for your advice to go back and look for the corners. What a novel idea, right? But in addition, you know, lines of occupation are really key here too. Like if you're not finding corners, but you're hitting an old fence, that's a really good sign that you're on the right planet. And in the case of that 100-foot bust, that kind of thing might help you find something quicker if you're seeing lines of occupation. Like, for instance, the boundary as you have it is cutting through a building. Well, maybe you don't want to cut that building unless you really have to. Yeah. So maybe you want to go take another look. And there was a question in the chat about right-of-way. You know, having worked at Caltrans and putting our brain power together a long time ago, we came up with this adjustment as being our adjustment of choice for our right-of-way determination.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, you bring up a very good point. When I started my surveying career in Maryland, I came back from Vietnam in '68, and I did not have a skill set from the Army that I could transfer to the civilian world. So I started surveying, and I thought it was landscaping. I had no idea what I was doing until they handed me a plumb bob, and I thought, what am I going to do with this? But I remember when we were out doing working in the woods, especially doing traverses and stuff, and we ran across an old broken down fence or anything, we spent hours locating that old broken down fence. And I always wondered, my God, why? You know, well, I know why now, but at the time, my boss, I remember one time we didn't do it, we just happened to mention it, and the boss really got mad. He said, you get back out there and locate that. That's good stuff. And so, yeah, that's you always want to look at the evidence in the field. You always want to be have that in your mind, you know. So if you see something and it doesn't look right, you know, use that, what I call the common sense check. And if in doubt, locate it. You know, if you think, well, maybe it'll help, locate it. If, you know, I'd sooner have my field crew spend another half hour in the field bringing me back more information than not enough. So, of course, I'm not paying their salaries. That helps too. So.
You know, Jim, even a situation where you've got about 41 feet or so difference, you know, between the record and the actual between two monuments.
Yeah.
If you're in a situation where the monument out there just happens to be a rebar or something below the surface, another indispensable tool, because you can miss it so easy, is just having a good metal detector with you.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, then that gets complicated along a fence line with a bunch of barbed wire or something. So you need to know how to use your metal detector to isolate a pin under the ground that isn't sticking up above the surface. And just because you walk around in a 10, 15-foot circle and can't see anything, look what's below the ground.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you 100%. You know, it's, there's all kinds of things that we have to do in the field. And what concerns me is the way that we're getting so automated is that's why I got to, Trent, I really have to compliment you on what you're doing here with the Mentoring Mondays, because the technician and the young surveyor does not have the availability for people to mentor. I learned how to calculate a horizontal curve over the hood of a truck, you know, and we had 3-person crews, and I had good people that wanted me to learn, you know, and we just don't have that. It's just not the way the business is done now. That's the exact reason I wrote that book, you know.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, no,
okay.
we agree. And I'm next for January, I'm trying to do a bunch of business related ones. And then February, I really wanted to push like the field technician side of things as well. So we'll try to find topics on all of those situations. So I do have your math for surveyors. Is it okay if I share it with everybody in this group?
You share it with anybody who you think it would help.
Okay. And then you had sent out an email with some corrections for it. Do you have a new current PDF with those corrections?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have my latest one?
No,
I'll make sure you have it before the end of the day.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I have the one where you sent me the email with the corrections, but
and make sure you get one to Kat's son. That's cool.
Yeah, we'll have one in there. So Liam's jumped on a bunch of the math related ones, and he's been doing really good with them.
Yeah. And anybody who wants it, don't ever hesitate to ask, because I wrote it and I'm not charging for it, and I just got to get it out there to anybody who thinks they could use it. You know.
Hey, Trent, the chat was the next point I was going to make. If you found points intermediate, how do you deal with that? That's a great question in the chat.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Could you say that again, Michael? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go for it, Michael.
Oh, sure. Make me open up the chat. I just saw the bubble when it popped up.
No, I see it. There it is. Okay. After after the first adjustment, you go back out and you find C and D. How would you proceed? Especially if the found point is outside the 1 link or 5 minutes. So how would you go back in? So somebody found point C after you went back out there, and now making another adjustment, or?
These are original monuments. Monuments in the field hold. And if you find C and D, but you didn't find B, and you're going to put something in, you might want to do a little bit more arithmetic. You know, because you know that you're on to something now. You found 2 of them, you know.
Yep.
So do a little bit more arithmetic, and you can do the same thing just with less information, you know, a shorter distance. And but you know, I think it's gospel in the surveying profession that original monuments in the field are worth their weight in gold. Or they say there's no error to an original monument, you know. Well, I hope that answered the question.
I would suggest the same answer as you gave before. With 40 feet floating around, you might want to go back and look a 3rd time.
Yeah, just, you know, if a lot is good, more is better, and too much is just right, you know. So that's really all I have, Trent, unless you have anything else that I can help you with on this. I'll be more than happy to. Can they get a copy of this PowerPoint or a PDF? Did I send you a PDF of it? All right. Yeah, so anybody who wants it, again.
Yeah, you sent me the PowerPoint. I put it in the Dropbox, so there's a Dropbox link associated with each one of these weeks. So
good.
They'll be able to grab that. I'll put the math book in there as well.
Great.
And then I'll find some other stuff in there. We can pick on Rob McMillan because he just decided to join us, and make him follow up the presentation with a grant boundary adjustment, Rob.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
That's good.
He probably just woke up from his nap.
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
You're on mute, Rob.
Yeah, that's it. No, I was just, uh-oh.
You're
Let's
good.
say you're on mute, Rich. I like it. No, just helping one of our employees get their paperwork done for retirement. So making space for one of y'all on here to come to sunny San Diego. But yeah, I do have a quick. Joey Walt says San Diego. Aha, yeah, District 11. We're so good. We're number one twice. But yeah, my grant boundary adjustment story is back in the first time I took the LS exam, which I wasn't quite ready for, and here in California. And I was sitting next to my first party chief here at Caltrans, and he was taking the exam also. He was a party chief in training when I joined. And when we broke for lunch, we sat down outside and had sandwiches next to each other. And I said, "Well, how'd it go?" And he goes, "It went okay, I think." And I said, "Yeah, I think so too." And he says, "Well," he goes, "Man, I bet this afternoon session will have a ground boundary adjustment on it." And I thought about that for a second and thought, yeah, you might be right. And then I finished my sandwich quickly. I got back to the doors to get back into the place where we held the exam. And I was like first in line. As soon as they opened the doors, man, I beeline back to my seat and I dig out my BLM manual. I'm like, what the hell is a ground boundary adjustment? I'm like, I know I've heard the term. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
So
It's a good tool. It's a good tool.
Richard had sent me a message to clarify, is the use of this method most appropriate when establishing a survey where you think distances are less accurate than angles? And would you use another method in reverse, or would you think they are substantially equal?
Well, boy, I tell you, that's a tough one. I would have to see the survey at the time, because there might be a way, like, that the grant boundary might be just perfect for this. Or you might have another way where you might want to do a least squares adjustment, or, any number of things, But I know that that's not an answer, but there's so many tools available to us that we have to pick the right tool for the right job at the time. And if you think the angles are better than the distances, or the distances are better than the angles, well, you have to make a decision. But where the grant boundary is important is that if you do not want to mess with the geometry of the boundary, that's what you got to remember. You don't want to mess with that geometry. You want to keep that angular relationship the same. That's what you got to do. So.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I was just thinking, as the methods change, how we establish or do our surveying, and maybe we're using GPS, and so it's more of a positional uncertainty, and there really aren't any angles turned. Is this applicable or not?
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have seen that class that I put on with random error theory, but that speaks to what you're talking about right there, because there's so many random errors around in our measurements.
Yep.
Of course, that's a 4-hour class, so I don't think we can do it here.
Yeah, I think Rich hit that on the head. Is that this is really it's a rotate and scale kind of situation.
Exactly. Yes.
What you're doing
really,
here is stretching your
Mm-hmm.
distances, or compressing the distances.
It's we were talking at the beginning of this. If you have Civil 3D, man, there's nothing to it. You rotate it, you scale it, and it's done. Yeah. And most of the other survey softwares have all this on it too, as well. So. But it's not a big deal.
Hey, James, I have a question.
Okay.
In the 73 manual on page 141, section 5-43, it talks about angle points of non-repairing meander lines. And then when you read into the paragraphs, it's talking about meandering the body of water.
Yeah.
And I've never understood what a non-riparian meander line is if you're meandering something. And I'm wondering if you've ever used that method. It's different from the grant boundary.
Yeah, yeah.
Have you ever used that?
Yes, I have. I have adjusted meander lines, and if you read in there and you see how it's done, it's a compass rule adjust is what it is. And with meander lines, historically, you would monumental meander lines on the section corners or the township and range lines. But
At
the
the meander corners.
going through the section, the angle points were never monumented. All
Right.
you have is the record information there, and it's always going to be off because they're pretty loose about that.
Yeah.
And the non-riparian is, you know, the meander line. The original intent of the meander line was to segregate the water from the land so they could calculate how much land they had in this section. And
Yeah.
that's what it was for. It wasn't intended to be a boundary. And in some cases, especially here in the state of Washington, in some cases, it can become a boundary. So you have to know the state laws and when it can be a boundary line. And there's some things in the public land survey system. I remember studying that when I took my CFED. But as a rule, it's not. So
What was confusing was calling it, when they call it a non-riparian meander line, and obviously they're meandering a body of water.
no, that was I know exactly what you're talking about. But if you have a riparian boundary, as I understand the definition of a riparian boundary, it means you have water rights. You go up to the water. You have riparian rights.
Yes.
And the boundary was the meander line was not intended to be a boundary. That's why they called it non-riparian. And I believe that was in the 73 manual. And I
Yep.
don't know if they have that same wording in the 2009 manual. I don't think they do, to tell you the truth.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Good
Hope it
question.
helped.
Good question, Pat. Nolan sent me one that if you had a record angle to the nearest 5-minute closing from F to A, would you adjust differently? Adjusting angles?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't adjust any differently. If I was doing a grant boundary, you know, I wouldn't adjust any differently. If I, because again, we don't want to mess with that geometry. That's why I wouldn't. If I'm doing a grant boundary, if I was doing something else, then things would change. You know.
Anybody else want to jump on for questions?
Well, this was a good discussion. We had some good. We talked about some good stuff today.
That was a good
Or
one.
tonight.
Yep.
And Trent, I really have to commend you for putting this together. You doing an invaluable service to the surveying community. Really, this is great. And
Yeah, it was-
anytime I can help you with anything, just let me know here.
Yep, absolutely. Definitely reach out.
And send my book out to everybody. Stop people on the streets, you know, hand them a copy. I don't care.
Absolutely.
Hey, Trent, how often do you do this? This is the first time I've ever saw this.
No worries. So I do it every Monday. It's every Monday at 4 o'clock Pacific time. So depending on your time zone. And so we have 11 other weeks on the website. And so you can jump back, you can watch all the prior recordings. And then we'll keep going. I'm going to take the last 2 weeks of December off, obviously with everybody doing vacations and that kind of stuff. We just won't get, attendance and that kind of stuff. But it will pick back up January 4th and keep going every week. So
Fantastic.
basically a kind of a mini conference, if you'll say, right? It's just a weekly hour and a half Monday afternoon mentoring Mondays. So we find a different topic every week.
It's a good review.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. We've had some you know, there's 37 of us on here tonight, where it was actually 82 that registered. We've been averaging about 40 or so, 40%, 50% of the ones that actually registered jump on. But I do a follow-up email after every week, or after every night, I should say. And if there was any topics or books or suggestions, I'll add that to the follow-up email, send out the link to the registration to the next week, that kind of stuff. So one of the things, Jim, I forgot to bring up to you earlier is the last few speakers, we've been trying to get your favorite book and just building a library based on books. So it could be a business book, could be survey book, could be any type of book that you think somebody on the group might benefit from.
I'll send you one. You know, I'm on a real crusade about random error theory.
Okay.
Because I think it's incredibly important, especially for the technician to know.
Yep.
And I have an excellent book that I've shamelessly taken advantage of in my PowerPoints and in my classes that I give, but I had the author's permission, so that's not too bad. But yeah, it's Measurement Theory and Its Applications by Dr. Benjamin. I got to get his name. I'm sorry, I don't have it right now, but I'll send you the information.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll get it added. So we had Rob, I think week 3 and 4 or 4 and 5 or something. We had broke up error theory into a couple week session as well. So we that particular book that came out of that one was by Barry B. Austin's Error in Practical Measurement in Science and Engineering Technology. So.
He went into random error theory and statistics and all that.
We did, yep.
Good, good.
Please go to the website and take a look at that, and I welcome your input on revising that as necessary.
Yep. It's week 4 and 5. You can go back and watch those, James.
Good.
Anybody else got anything they want to chime in on before we log off?
Just want to tell everybody that's on here to make sure you keep this a secret. We don't want more than 40 people on here at a time. Yeah. Now tell all your friends, get your surveyor people to come listen to our talks. I'm happy to see my boss is here tonight. Wave, Mike. So
you were late joining, Rob, but Jocelyn got her results today and she is a California registrant.
Nice. Way to go, Jocelyn.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Thank you.
Well, Trent, thanks for having me.
Of course.
And I hope that you all got something out of it. And
yep.
Like I say, if I can help you out or any of the others, don't hesitate to contact me.